Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Mr. Jobs English podcast. We're really happy to have you here today. I'm Mia.
And I'm James. It's great to be here with you again, sitting right next to Mia, ready to explore another real profession with real English vocabulary.
Today's profession is exciting, intense, a little dangerous, and honestly very cool. We're talking about the world of welders.
Welders are the people who take metal and literally fuse it together using heat. And when we say heat, we mean extremely high temperatures. Sparks flying everywhere, metal melting, protective helmets. It's a powerful job.
And the vocabulary is fascinating because it mixes everyday English with very specific technical words. The good thing is, even if you're not a welder, the vocabulary helps you understand so many movies, construction scenes, factory tours, and even job descriptions.
And we're keeping everything in simple English today, like always, so everyone listening from beginners to intermediates can follow along naturally.
Before anything else, let's start with the basics. The word welder is the person. The verb to weld means to join metal using heat. And the noun welding is the activity or the process.
So welder, weld, welding. 3 simple forms, and you'll hear them all the time.
Welders usually work with something called a welding machine, or sometimes welding equipment. And one of the most iconic tools they use is the welding torch.
Yes, the torch is the tool that produces the heat. It melts the metal, and when the welder moves the torch carefully along the joint where 2 pieces of metal meet, those pieces fuse together.
And because this is such a hot and bright process, welders need a lot of protection. So one very important word is helmet, but welders use a special type called a welding helmet, which has a dark protective lens to keep their eyes safe.
The bright welding light can seriously damage your eyes if you don't protect them, so welders always wear that big, dark visor. And that visor is sometimes called a shield because it literally shields the eyes and face.
And they also use gloves, but not normal gloves. These are thick, heat-resistant gloves to protect their hands from sparks.
Speaking of sparks, anyone listening has probably seen welding in a movie. All those bright white sparks flying everywhere, that's real. And it's why welders wear protective clothing, flame-resistant jackets, aprons, long sleeves, no exposed skin.
Welders are metal superheroes.
Pretty much.
Something interesting about welding is that there are different types. We don't need to go deep into technical categories, but there are simple names you might hear like arc welding, MIG welding, and TIG welding. These names come from the method used to create the heat or the type of gas used.
But don't worry about the details. Just hearing these words helps with listening skills. The important part is that welders choose the method based on the job.
And speaking of jobs, welders work in many places: construction sites, factories, workshops, shipyards, auto repair shops, pipelines, even art studios. Some sculptures are made through welding.
And because they work in so many environments, welders follow safety rules constantly. For example, before welding, they often clean the metal surface to remove dirt, paint, or rust. That's important vocabulary. Surface, rust, clean, prepare.
And when 2 pieces of metal meet, the place where they connect is called a joint. So the welder welds the joint. And after welding, they often inspect it, meaning they check it carefully to make sure the connection is strong.
Inspect is a great English verb because it's common in many professions. Inspect the building, inspect the pipes, inspect the machine. It's useful vocabulary.
Something welders do a lot is measure. They measure metal pieces before cutting or joining them. They use rulers, tape measures, and sometimes digital tools. And the verb measure appears in so many real-life situations.
And sometimes they need to cut metal before welding using tools like a saw or a cutting torch. Cut, shape, smooth, file. These verbs show up naturally in technical English.
And here's something else that welders talk about: temperature. They need to be aware of how hot the metal is. Metal stays hot for a long time after welding, so they have to be careful not to touch it.
And that brings us to safety vocabulary. Hot surface, caution, danger, protect, safety gear, all super important when working with heat.
I always admire how calm welders look while doing something so intense. Imagine holding a tool that melts metal like butter. I would panic.
I would panic too. Actually, no, I'd make it worse. I'd start talking too much and distract myself. That's a dangerous combination.
One thing welders need is a steady hand. They have to move the torch slowly and consistently. If they shake or move too fast, the weld won't be smooth.
And that word, smooth, is useful. Welders often check if the final weld is smooth or if it needs grinding.
Grinding is when they use a tool called a grinder to make the metal surface even and clean. Another great real-life verb, grind.
And it also shows up in cooking, like grinding coffee or spices. English is so flexible.
Welders also deal with metal plates, pipes, frames, beams, and structures. They work from blueprints and drawings, which means they need basic reading skills and visual understanding.
Blueprints is a good word. It means technical drawings with instructions. Construction workers, electricians, plumbers, architects, they all use blueprints.
And welders follow these drawings to know exactly where to weld, how long, how thick the weld needs to be, and which type of metal they're working with.
Speaking of metal types, welders work with steel, aluminum, iron, stainless steel, and sometimes more specialized materials.
Even the pronunciation of aluminum is fun because it's different in Canada and the US.
Yes, in Canada, we often say aluminium, like the British pronunciation.
And in the US, we say aluminum, shorter and simpler.
I love when we compare these. It's such a natural moment of cultural learning.
And welders experience this in real life too. If a Canadian and an American welder work together, they would notice these vocabulary differences on the job, but they would understand each other perfectly.
Another important point about welders is that they work with precision, a great vocabulary word. Precision means accuracy, doing something with exactness. Welders often need perfect cuts and perfect alignment.
Alignment is another good one. Alignment means everything is lined up correctly. When the pieces are aligned, you can weld them without gaps.
Gaps are small spaces between pieces of metal. Welders want zero gaps.
And they use clamps to hold the metal in place. A clamp is a tool that grips and secures the metal so it doesn't move.
And welders often work outdoors, so weather vocabulary becomes relevant. Heat, cold, wind, rain all affect the job.
And indoor workshops have their own vocabulary: ventilation, workspace, tools, bench, equipment, storage.
Something I always find fascinating is how welders talk about strength. Not personal strength, but the strength of the weld, the ability of the welded joint to support weight or resist pressure.
And speaking of strength, welders also check for cracks. Cracks in the metal can be dangerous, so they inspect their work carefully.
Let's bring a natural mini-story into this, like we do in every episode, because stories help vocabulary become memorable.
Imagine this. A welder arrives at a construction site early in the morning. The site supervisor explains that they need a metal frame repaired because one of the joints is weak. The welder inspects the frame, measures the area, cuts a new piece of metal, aligns it carefully, clamps it in place, and starts welding with the torch. Sparks fly, the metal melts, and the pieces fuse together. After finishing, the welder lets it cool, then inspects the weld again to make sure there are no cracks. The supervisor smiles and says, "Perfect job." This gives us so many words in context: inspect, measure, cut, align, clamp, weld, cool, crack, frame, joint, supervisor, fuse.
And that's a very real situation. Welders solve problems every day. They don't just join metal, they rebuild structures, fix equipment, strengthen foundations, and keep machinery working.
And they need physical endurance too. Welding can be tiring. You might have to stand for long periods, hold heavy tools, work in tight spaces, or climb up to reach high areas.
That's why welders often say they have to stay focused and stay steady. Focus and steady are great everyday words.
And even if you're not a welder, this vocabulary helps with general English skills because it appears in construction, repairs, factories, DIY projects, and even news reports.
Welders are a vital part of almost every industry. Buildings, cars, bridges, ships, pipes, furniture. If it's metal, welders probably touched it at some point.
And that's what makes learning their vocabulary so fun. It's real, practical, and connected to the world around us.
Something I always notice when I watch welders work is how they move with so much control. There's this slow, steady motion of the torch, almost like handwriting, but with fire. And you can tell they're using years of experience.
Yes, and the movement is so precise. If they move too fast or too slow, the weld changes completely. It might become weak or uneven, and those words, weak and uneven, are perfect vocabulary for describing results that are not strong enough or not smooth enough.
Welders always want their welds to be strong and even, and they have different techniques to achieve that, depending on the metal type, the thickness, and the environment. And here's something that many people don't realize. Welding requires not only strength, but a lot of calculation.
Definitely. Welders think about angles constantly. The angle of the torch, the angle of the metal, the angle of the joint. Everything depends on angle. An angle is one of the simplest but most useful math-related words in English.
And it shows up in daily life. Cutting something at a wrong angle, sitting at a weird angle, adjusting a camera angle. Listeners probably hear this word all the time.
Welders also deal with pressure, especially when working with pipes or closed structures. Pressure is the force inside a system, and if the weld isn't strong enough, pressure can create cracks or leaks.
I remember a welder in Ohio once told me that most of welding is preparation. He said if you prepare the metal well, the weld takes care of itself.
That's interesting. And that word prepare is important in English because it's so general and useful. Prepare the metal, prepare the tools, prepare a meal, prepare for a test.
Welders prepare surfaces by sanding them or removing rust. The verb sand means to make something smoother with sandpaper. And that action is the same in woodworking and metalworking.
And before welding, they sometimes use something called a tack weld, a very small weld that holds two pieces of metal together temporarily. It's like saying, don't move, stay right there while I finish the real weld.
And it works wonderfully. Tack welds are tiny but strong enough to keep everything aligned.
That word again. Aligned. We talked about alignment earlier, but it's so important in welding that repeating it actually helps learners remember.
And welders check alignment visually or with tools. They might use a level, a tool that shows if something is straight and balanced.
Oh, the little bubble in the center.
Yes, exactly. That bubble helps the welder confirm that everything is straight before they start. And you'd be surprised at how many beginners in construction vocabulary don't know the word level, even though it's so simple.
Welders also work with blueprints, too, so they need to interpret drawings. A blueprint might show the location of beams, joints, and support structures.
And that's where the vocabulary gets interesting because welders communicate with other workers, engineers, supervisors, construction managers, so the English becomes very practical.
Communication is definitely part of their job. They often explain what they're doing, ask questions about measurements, confirm material types, or discuss safety.
Safety is a huge topic in welding. The heat, the sparks, the bright light, the fumes. Welders have to be aware of everything around them. That's where we get vocabulary like ventilation.
Ventilation is the airflow in a room, and welders need good ventilation because the fumes from melting metal can be dangerous.
And speaking of fumes, welders sometimes work with respirators or masks that help filter the air. Not the same as a welding helmet, but an extra layer of protection.
So we have gloves, helmets, masks, jackets. Welders almost look like they're going on a mission.
Mission with fire and metal.
Now, imagine a welder working in a workshop. The machines are humming, the ventilation system is strong, sparks are flying in the corner, and someone is grinding a piece of metal. The soundscape is so distinctive. And that word, soundscape, is great vocabulary too.
It means the combination of sounds around you. Welders definitely have their own soundscape. Buzzing, crackling, grinding, clanking.
Clanking is a good one. It's the sound of metal hitting metal, and that sound is everywhere in welding environments.
Welders also mark their metal before cutting or welding. They use chalk or markers to draw lines so they know where to weld. And mark, draw, and line, these are simple but essential everyday English words.
And when they cut metal, they create something called sparks, which we already mentioned, but another vocabulary word is debris. Debris is the small pieces that fall off while cutting or grinding.
And welders clean the debris afterward. The verb clean is always important in English because it appears in every job.
Welders sometimes need to cool the metal quickly, and they might use water or compressed air. Compressed air comes from an air compressor, and that's a great technical term.
Welders also use workbenches, vices, and toolboxes. A vice is a tool that holds metal securely like a strong mechanical hand.
I love that description, a mechanical hand.
And a toolbox is self-explanatory, but it's amazing how many English learners don't use that word naturally until they hear it in context.
Welders sometimes need to weld in uncomfortable positions, maybe overhead, maybe in a corner, maybe in a narrow space. And that's why vocabulary like reach, stretch, bend, and balance appear naturally in their world.
And verbs like heat, melt, join, remove, cool, shape, hold, support, and strengthen are everyday welding verbs.
My favorite welding verb is fuse. It's so poetic. Two pieces of metal become one.
And that idea of fusion shows up in other English contexts too, like fusion restaurants or cultural fusion.
Welders sometimes face weather challenges too. If the job is outdoors, strong wind can affect the welding flame. Rain can be dangerous. Cold can make metal behave differently.
That's true. In the U.S., welders in northern states talk a lot about cold metal being harder to work with.
And Canada too. Cold weather makes metal contract, so welders have to consider temperature changes.
And coastal welders deal with humidity and salt, which cause rust faster, so the vocabulary becomes moisture, corrosion, prevention.
Corrosion means metal degrading, usually because of water or chemicals. Welders fight corrosion with coatings or special materials.
And that word, coating, is super useful. Coating means a protective layer. It can be paint, oil, sealant.
Welders use coatings to protect the finished weld or to prepare the metal before working.
Some welders specialize in creative work like metal art. They weld sculptures, metal furniture, decorative pieces.
And artistic welders use vocabulary like shape, bend, curve, texture, finish. It's a beautiful mix of technical and creative English.
And then you have industrial welders, pipeline welders, underwater welders.
Underwater welders amaze me. The idea of welding under the ocean is unbelievable, but the vocabulary stays similar. Weld, torch, gear, suit, mask, pressure.
Pressure becomes a huge thing underwater, literally.
Welders also learn to listen to metal. Not like music, but they observe the sound of the torch, the temperature, the color of the metal as it heats.
Color is an indicator. When metal becomes red, orange, yellow, welders know exactly when it's ready, and color vocabulary becomes part of their daily language.
Something I love about teaching welding vocabulary is that every word is active. It's about doing, moving, heating, shaping, checking, fixing.
Yes, it's dynamic English, and the verbs are strong. They make the learner feel more confident.
Let's bring another natural mini story to help listeners visualize everything. Imagine a welder receives a call from a factory manager who needs a broken machine frame repaired. The welder arrives, inspects the frame, notices a crack near the base, measures the area, and decides to replace a small section. They cut the damaged part, prepare the surface, align a new piece, tack weld it, then create a full weld with the torch. Sparks fly, the metal glows, the weld line forms perfectly. After cooling, the welder grinds the surface until it's smooth, wipes away the debris, and tests the machine. The manager thanks them, saying, "You saved the entire production line today."
That's such a real scenario. Welders save the day so many times.
They really do. And they use so many essential English words in the process.
And I think we're giving listeners the full experience, tools, actions, safety, environment, challenges, stories, everything.
That's the goal, learning through real life context. I always find it amazing how welders manage to stay calm while working with something as intense as molten metal. It's like they're mixing patience with fire. And there's this one moment I always think about when I picture a welder's day. The moment when they inspect their work right after the metal cools. That little pause, that careful eye, the tiny tilt of the head. It feels like an artist checking a painting. But instead of paint, it's steel.
Totally. And I think that moment says a lot about the profession. Because welding isn't only about joining metal, it's about making something strong, safe, and built to last. And welders have this vocabulary that reflects that sense of responsibility. When you hear them talk about things like a bead, for example, that's the line of molten metal that forms when they weld two pieces together. You start understanding how much technique and control are behind each movement. A bead can be smooth, clean, even. And just like you said, it's basically their brush stroke.
And they talk a lot about penetration, too. Not in a scary way. It just means how deeply the weld melts into the metal. When penetration is good, the weld is strong. If it's weak, the joint can fail. Beginners in English sometimes think this word sounds strange, but it's super common in welding, and it's interesting that they use it so naturally. Good penetration, poor penetration, full penetration, or partial penetration. Very technical, but once you understand the meaning, it clicks.
Right. And something that welders repeat all the time is safety first. They say it in every shop I visited. And honestly, when you're working with sparks, hot metal, and electricity, that phrase becomes your daily vocabulary. Welders always talk about their PPE, personal protective equipment. Helmet, gloves, jacket, boots. And the helmet is special because it isn't a simple helmet. It has a welding hood, which includes a lens that gets dark when the arc ignites. That lens protects your eyes from something called arc flash, which is basically a burn to your eyes caused by the brightness of the welding arc. Welders often describe that pain as feeling like sand in your eyes. Definitely something nobody wants.
Oh, yes. Canadians who work in welding talk about flash burns, too. We have a lot of welders in Alberta and British Columbia, especially in construction, oil fields, and pipeline projects. They always tell you, never look at the arc even for a split second without protection. And I love how welders use vocabularies like shielding gas in such a calm, everyday tone. Shielding gas sounds almost mysterious, but it's just the gas that protects the weld pool from contamination. In MIG welding, for example, welders often use argon or a mix of argon and CO2. And when they say the weld is contaminated, they mean that impurities entered the molten metal and the weld became weak or porous.
Porous is another word welders use a lot. When a weld has tiny holes or bubbles inside, they call it
porosity. And porosity is one of the biggest problems because it reduces strength. So welders always check for it. They might say, this bead has porosity, or we need to rework this joint. Rework is another key word. It means they have to fix or redo part of the weld. And nobody loves rework because it means lost time.
I imagine welders must feel exactly like people who cook. You try to do something perfect the first time so you don't have to redo it. But at the same time, the process is beautiful to watch. And this reminds me of a mini moment I saw once in a workshop in Toronto. I was watching a welder repair a metal railing, and after he finished the bead, he tapped the metal with a small hammer, listening to the sound. He said that experienced welders can sometimes tell if the weld is good just by the tone. Not always, of course, but it's like a quick instinctive check before they inspect visually.
That's awesome. And it's real. Some welders say the metal talks. Not literally, obviously, but through vibration, color, and the way it cools. They use vocabulary like heat affected zone or HAZ all the time. That's the area around the weld that changes because of the heat. If it's overheated, the metal becomes weak. So welders check for it visually. They'll say, the HAZ is too wide, or the HAZ looks good.
And you can really feel how much pride they take in this work. Maybe that's why I enjoy connecting vocabulary to real behaviors, like when welders talk about tacking. Tacking is when they put small welds to hold the metal pieces in position before doing the final weld. It's like setting up the structure. And in English, welders might say, let's tack these pieces first, or make sure the tacks are strong. Without tacks, the metal can shift.
One thing I always notice is how they love telling stories. Welders love to talk about unusual jobs, complicated angles, or tight spaces. That's another common expression, tight space. When they say they worked in a tight space, it means they had little room to move. And every welder has at least one story about crawling under something, squeezing between metal beams, or welding overhead. Overhead welding is exactly what it sounds like, welding above your head. And that's one of the hardest positions because sparks fall down. Welders joke about sparks going into places sparks were never meant to go.
I can imagine. And welders do 4 main welding positions: flat, horizontal, vertical, and overhead. Flat is the easiest, overhead the hardest, and their vocabulary reflects that. They might say, I prefer flat positions, or vertical up takes more control. When they say vertical up, they mean welding upward. Vertical down is the opposite direction. And you can see how vocabulary becomes essential for efficiency. The minute they say it, the whole team understands exactly what technique they're using.
Right. And something that welders repeat all the time is clean your metal. They sound simple, but it's a golden rule. Dirty metal creates bad welds. So they grind, brush, or sand the metal surface before starting. Grinding is common, and welders often say, let me grind this first. And that leads to one of the most iconic welding tools, the grinder. The noise of a grinder is unmistakable, and welders take that sound as part of their daily life.
Speaking of daily life, I think this is the perfect moment to bring a small story into our conversation, because welders often work in teams, and teamwork vocabulary appears naturally. There was a welder I met in Vancouver who told me a funny situation. He was working with a new apprentice, someone very young, very nervous, and very careful. The job was simple: welding metal frames for a small staircase. The apprentice kept asking, is this aligned? Is this straight? Is this level? And the older welder simply said, trust your eyes, but confirm with your tools. And then he added, if you don't trust your tape measure, you'll never finish a job. I love how technical jobs come with small bits of wisdom like that.
That's definitely a thing among American welders, too. They love sharing lessons, and this makes the vocabulary even richer. For example, alignment, level, square, angle, joint, gap. Welders always talk about gaps, the small space between two pieces before welding. The gap determines how the metal melts and how the weld forms. If the gap is too big, the weld might fail. If it's too small, the weld may not penetrate well. And when welders check the gap, they often say, "This gap is too tight," or "Open this gap a bit."
Another thing that stands out is how welders talk about the arc. The arc is the electric bridge between the electrode and the metal that creates the heat. And welders say things like, keep a stable arc. Watch your arc length. The arc is too long. The arc is too short. Arc length is the distance between the electrode and the metal. Beginners often struggle with this. If the arc is too long, the weld becomes messy. If it's too short, the electrode sticks. And when it sticks, welders simply say, I stuck the rod. Very casual, very normal vocabulary for them.
And you can clearly see how learning English through real jobs makes vocabulary meaningful. Welders also say things like weld pool, which is the tiny liquid area created by heat. Watching the pool is the key. Experienced welders say, watch the pool tells you everything. And they're right. The pool shows where the metal flows, how the bead forms, and how the heat spreads.
Welders also talk a lot about consistency. That applies to bead size, speed, arc length, and movement. Their vocabulary reflects rhythm. They say steady hand, controlled motion, smooth pass. And that little word pass is important. A pass is one continuous movement of the weld. Sometimes a weld requires multiple passes. They call that multi-pass welding. And they might say, we need 3 passes here, or do a root pass first. The root pass is the first one at the bottom of the joint.
And after all of this vocabulary and these techniques, one of my favorite things is how welders talk at the end of a job. They use simple, satisfying expressions. Solid work, clean finish, good weld, strong joint, looks good, or that'll hold. That last one, that'll hold, is very American, and welders say it when they're confident the weld will support whatever load it needs to.
Canadians say something similar, but with a slightly softer tone, something like, looks strong or feels good. I love how language reflects personality, and welders really bring personality to their vocabulary. They talk with confidence because they build things that literally hold the world together.
And after everything we shared today, techniques, vocabulary, stories, sparks flying everywhere, I think listeners now have a strong, clear picture of what welders do and how they talk. Every word matters when you're dealing with metal and fire.
Absolutely. And because welders rely so much on communication for safety and precision, learning this vocabulary in English helps learners understand real-life situations. And if you enjoyed being here with us today, listening to all this practical and powerful language, you can stay connected with the podcast, follow it, hit the like button, and of course, tell us which profession you'd like to explore next.
We love being here with you, sharing real English from real jobs. It's always a pleasure.
Always. So thank you for listening. Take good care and keep learning with us.
See you next time.
Bye.